The kitchen radio was tuned to RDP a chorus, the way it always was, and I was descaling a coffee pot when the programming broke. Not an emergency tone. Not the 3-pulse civil protection alert we'd been trained to recognize since the 2022 seismic upgrades. Just a male voice mainland accent. Lisbon studio reading a Reuters wire translation with the careful pronunciation of someone who doesn't understand what he's saying. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory has confirmed that the Madrid Deep Space Communications Complex recorded an anomalous return signal at 0347 UTC during a routine tracking pass of the Voyager 1 spacecraft. The signal, which does not match any known spacecraft telemetry profile, contained a repeating encoded sequence that JPL analysts have identified as geographic coordinates. Those coordinates are 39 degrees, 25 minutes north, 31 degrees, 17 minutes west. I put the coffee pot down. He read them again. 39:25 north, 31:17 west. My hands were wet, and I wiped them on my apron without thinking. The way you do when something mechanical in your body takes over because the thinking part has stalled. I knew those numbers, not because I'm a navigator or because I memorized charts. I knew them the way you know your own postal code, the way your body knows which direction is downhill. Those coordinates were in the Atlantic. They were west of us. 40 kilometers, maybe 45, off the western shelf of Flores. I live on Flores. I have lived on Flores for 53 years. Teresa and I were both born here, married here, raised Inez here before she left for university in Coimbra and never quite came back. I retired from the marine biology station at Lajes das Flores 6 years ago. Teresa still fishes. I turned the radio up, and I stood there in my kitchen. In a house my grandfather built from basalt block, on the westernmost island of the Azores, the westernmost point of Europe. And I listened to a man in Lisbon explain that something beneath my ocean had spoken to the stars. And the stars had answered. By midday, the story had metastasized in the way modern stories do, not through careful confirmation, but through screenshot and repost, each iteration less precise and more excited than the last. Here is what I was able to piece together from RDP, from the BBC World Service on shortwave, and from Teresa's nephew, Tiago, who has reliable internet and no sense of proportion. At 0347 UTC, the Madrid Deep Space Network Complex, one of 3 ground stations NASA uses to communicate with interplanetary spacecraft, was conducting a standard tracking pass on Voyager 1. This is routine. Voyager 1 is over 24 billion kilometers from Earth. The signal it sends back is inconceivably faint. Madrid's 70-meter dish antenna listens for it the way you might press your ear to a wall and try to hear a whisper 3 towns away. During this pass, the dish received Voyager's expected telemetry. But underneath it, or rather, woven into it, on the same carrier frequency but modulated differently, was a second signal. Stronger, much stronger, not from Voyager's direction at all. JPL's initial analysis took 4 hours. What they found was a repeating binary sequence that, when decoded using the same mathematical framework NASA itself had used for the Voyager Golden Record, a framework publicly available since 1977, resolved into geographic coordinates. My coordinates, our coordinates, the ocean west of Flores. The press conference happened at 1100 UTC. A deputy director, whose name I didn't catch, stood at a podium with the JPL logo behind her and read the coordinates aloud, on camera, to the world. That was the moment. Not the signal itself. Signals can be classified, contained, studied quietly. But someone at NASA made the decision to say those numbers into a microphone, in front of cameras. and that decision cannot be taken back. I have thought about this many times since. Whether it was courage, whether it was protocol, whether it was simply that no one in the room understood what it would mean for the people who actually live at those coordinates. By noon, Flores had a population of 3,814. We had one harbor, one airport with a grass-adjacent runway, and exactly zero capacity to absorb what was coming. Teresa came home from the harbor at 12:30. She'd heard. Everyone had heard. "It's nothing," she said, hanging her jacket on the hook by the door. It was not nothing. I need to explain something about Teresa, because she matters to this story as much as I do. And because if I describe only what she did without telling you who she is, you'll think she was stubborn or foolish. She was neither. She was a fisherwoman who had spent 40 years reading water, and water had never lied to her. Teresa fished the Western Shelf her entire adult life. The area those coordinates described, she knew it. She dragged long lines over it. She called it the Barranco Frio, the cold hole, because there was an upwelling there that dropped surface temperatures 3 degrees and brought bait fish up in clouds. It was one of her best spots. "I was over that water last Thursday," she said, eating soup. "Pulled 12 kilos of wreckfish, nothing strange. No strange sounds on the sounder. No unusual current. The water was the water." "The signal came from a NASA deep space antenna," I said. "It wasn't a fish finder." "I'm telling you what I know. And I'm telling you what the entire world now knows. Those coordinates are 40 kilometers from our house." She put her spoon down. "Marcos, every few years, some scientist finds something in the Atlantic, and it turns out to be a thermal vent or an equipment malfunction or a whale carcass that confused some instrument. Remember the thing with the submarine cables in 2019? Everyone said it was seismic, and it was a fishing trawler from Vigo dragging anchor. This came through a deep space communications network, from a signal embedded in Voyager's carrier wave. That is not a trawler from Vigo." Teresa looked at me for a long time. We have been married 31 years, and I know her silences the way I know weather patterns by pressure and duration. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Sell the boat? Leave the island? It's coordinates on a radio broadcast, Marcos. Coordinates of open ocean. There's nothing there. You don't know that. I've been there. I know that water. You know the surface. That landed differently than I intended. Teresa had lost her father to the sea, not to a storm or an accident, to a depth. Her father free dove for limpets and barnacles off the cliffs at Rocha dos Bordoes, and one day did not come up. They found the body 2 days later, wedged in a crevice at 18 meters. Teresa was 14. When I said, "You know the surface," I saw her hear the other sentence underneath it, the one about depths that take people. "I'm going fishing tomorrow," she said quietly. "Same water, same lines. And when I come back with 12 kilos of wreckfish and nothing else, you'll feel better." I wanted to say, "Don't go there." I wanted to say, the entire world just heard someone read our ocean's address out loud. I wanted to say, I am not afraid of what's beneath the water. I am afraid of what will come across it toward us because of those numbers. I said none of those things. I cleared the soup bowls. Teresa left at 5 in the morning, which is when she always leaves. I lay in bed and listened to the engine of the Santa Ynez turn over, cough twice, and settle into its rhythm. I have heard that engine 10,000 times. It is the sound of a normal day beginning. I walked to the harbor at 9. I told myself it was to buy bread from the padaria near the quay. And that was true. But it was also true that I wanted to see what the harbor looked like. On the second day of the world, knowing our coordinates. It looked the same, almost. The fishing boats were out. The recreational sailboats sat in their slips. The ferry from Corvo, the only island smaller and more remote than ours, was tied up in its usual spot. Old Zé Oliveira sat on his crate by the fuel dock, mending a net, the way he has done every morning since his wife died 7 years ago. But there were two things different. First, the padaria had a line out the door. Not tourists, locals. People buying bread and standing in the queue longer than necessary because standing in a queue with your neighbors is a way of confirming that the world hasn't changed yet. I recognize this behavior. We did it during the 2023 earthquake swarm, purchasing normalcy by the loaf. Second, a boat I didn't recognize was anchored in the outer harbor. White hull, maybe 15 meters, with communication arrays on the mast that no pleasure craft carries. It hadn't been there yesterday. No flag I could see. Maria Helena, who runs the padaria, said it had arrived before dawn. Azores Maritime Authority called the harbor master at 4 this morning, she told me, sliding bread across the counter. Something about a research authorization, expedited. Whose boat? Nobody local. I took my bread and walked to the seawall and stood there in the wind. Flores is green and steep, and the wind comes from the west, carrying nothing but ocean for 3,000 kilometers until it hits Newfoundland. I have always loved that wind. It is the cleanest air in Europe. I called Inez in Coimbra. She answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been waiting for me to call. Pi, are you watching the news? We don't have cable, Phila. I have the radio. It's everywhere. CNN has a graphic. They've circled Flores. You can see our island on CNN. How does it look? Small, she said. And for the first time I heard the thing in her voice that I'd been feeling since yesterday. Not fear, exposure, the feeling of being found. They came by air first. The SATA propeller flights from São Miguel that usually carry 20 passengers and a modest cargo of mail and dairy products began arriving full, then fuller. The airline added a second daily flight, then a third, and by the afternoon of day 3, the little terminal at Flores Airport, which is, I promise you, not much larger than a generous living room, was processing more arrivals than it had handled in any single week of its existence. They were not tourists. You could tell by the luggage, hard cases, equipment bags, the particular posture of people who have been sent somewhere urgently and are annoyed about the logistics. I watched them from the hill above the runway, where I sometimes walk in the evenings. And I counted the types. Military officers in civilian clothes who still wore their watches on the inside of their wrists. Journalists with a bright, hungry look of people who believe the story is wherever they're standing. Scientists carrying pelican cases and speaking languages I could sort but not always follow: English, German, Japanese, something Nordic. And then there were the others, the ones who arrived without equipment or press credentials. Young people mostly. Backpacks, sleeping bags, a look in their eyes that I can only describe as pilgrimage. They'd seen the coordinates, and they had come, not to report or investigate, to be near. The Camara Municipal called an emergency session. I know this because Teresa's cousin Felipe sits on the council, and he phoned that evening, speaking fast. They want to establish a maritime exclusion zone around the coordinates, he said. Portuguese Navy is sending a frigate from Ponta Delgada. Americans have requested permission to deploy a research vessel. The French have asked. The Japanese have asked. Everyone has asked. What did the council say? What can the council say? We're a municipal government for an island of 4,000 people. We don't have jurisdiction over international waters. We don't even have jurisdiction over our own harbor right now. The Port Authority has been superseded by the Navy. This is what I'd been afraid of. Not the signal, not the coordinates, the convergence. When the world learns your address, the world comes to your door, and it does not wipe its feet. Teresa came home that evening with her 12 kilos of wrecked fish. She set them on the kitchen counter and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before. Not vindication, which I'd expected, but confusion. The water was fine, she said. Perfect conditions. Fish where they should be. Current normal. Temperature normal. But she sat down heavily. There were 4 vessels I've never seen anchored within visual range of my fishing ground. One of them asked me to move on VHF Channel 16. Asked me to move. For my own water. She said this with the quiet fury of a woman who has just been told she doesn't belong in her own kitchen. What did you tell them? I told them I'm a licensed Portuguese fisherwoman operating in Portuguese waters, and they can direct their requests to the harbor master in Lajes. And then I fished. On the 4th day, Teresa did something unexpected. She invited me on the boat. In 31 years, I had been on the Santa Ynez perhaps a dozen times. Teresa is not superstitious in the way some fishers are. She doesn't believe men on boats bring bad luck, but the Santa Ynez is her workspace, and she maintains it with the focused privacy of a woman who needs one place in the world that is entirely hers. For her to say, "Come with me today," over breakfast was significant. I said yes before she could reconsider. We motored out at dawn. The harbor was different now. The Navy frigate, an RP Bartolomeo Diaz, sat at anchor like a gray cliff face among the fishing boats, and a cluster of civilian research vessels had arranged themselves in a loose formation to the west. Teresa navigated through them without comment, her jaw set. The sea was calm. The Azores in late spring can give you days of glass-flat Atlantic, the swells so long and slow they feel more like breathing than waves. This was one of those days. The sky was overcast but bright, a luminous gray that turned the water silver. We reached the Barranco Frio Teresa's cold hole at 7:30. The coordinates NASA had broadcast were approximately 3 kilometers north of where we dropped our lines. I could see 2 of the research vessels in that direction, stationary, bristling with equipment. "We're fishing," Teresa said. Not to me. To the ocean, maybe. To the principle of the thing. She set the long lines. I sat on the transom bench and watched her work the way I used to watch her when we were young. And I'd ride along in the summers before I took the position at the marine station. Her hands on the lines had the same economy they'd always had. Nothing wasted. An hour in, Teresa turned off the engine. The silence that followed was the deep, ringing silence of open Atlantic. No shore sounds, no traffic, no birds at this distance. Just the water against the hull and the creak of the boat settling on its anchor line. "Listen," she said. I listened. At first, I heard only what I expected to hear. Water, wind. The distant mechanical hum of one of the research vessels running a winch. Then that stopped too, and the silence deepened. And beneath the silence below it, the way a bass note lives below a melody, I felt something. Not heard, felt. A pressure in my sternum that pulsed at intervals too regular to be organic. It was like standing next to a cathedral organ when the lowest pipe sounds below the range of hearing, above the range of imagination. "You feel that?" Teresa asked. "Yes." "Started about 10 days ago. I didn't say anything because I thought it was the engine mounts. I replaced them. Made no difference. Then I turned the engine off and it was still there. 10 days ago, Before the broadcast. Before the broadcast. We looked at each other across the deck of her boat. The Teresa I married would have shrugged and returned to her lines. This Teresa, the one who had felt something impossible in her own water and chosen not to tell her husband, who used to be a marine biologist, this Teresa looked afraid. "It's coming from below," she said. "From the floor." Our daughter came home. She told us it was because she missed us. That was not why. Ines arrived on the morning SATA flight with a small bag and the strained calm of someone who has been arguing with herself for 48 hours about whether she's overreacting. She is 30 years old, a doctoral candidate in computational linguistics at the University of Coimbra, and she has her mother's stubbornness and my habit of needing to see things for myself. "I'm not here because I'm worried," she said in the car from the airport. "Of course not," I said. "I'm here because my research group has been analyzing the signal structure, and I can do that work remotely, and I want to be close to the source data." Naturally. Stop smiling, Pi. She was here because she was worried. That evening, the three of us sat around the kitchen table the way we used to when she was in secondary school. Except instead of homework spread between us, it was Ines's laptop. Showing spectrograms she said she shouldn't be showing us because the data was under preliminary academic embargo. "The signal NASA received wasn't simple," she said. "The coordinates were just the outermost layer. Underneath the coordinate encoding, there are nested structures, patterns within patterns. My group thinks, and this is very preliminary, Pi, don't repeat this, that the coordinate layer was designed to be decoded first, intentionally, like a return address on an envelope. The actual message is inside." "What does the actual message say?" Teresa asked. "We don't know yet. The encoding is dense, but it's structured. It's not random. It's not noise. Something formatted this data to be read in a specific sequence, and the first thing it wanted us to read was a location." "Our location," I said. "Not your location. An ocean floor location. Whatever this signal is pointing to is approximately 2,000 meters below the surface, roughly 41 kilometers west-northwest of where we're sitting." The kitchen was very quiet. The radio was on, turned low, and RDP Acores was playing Fado Marisa, I think. The music filled the silence with a grief that felt, in that moment, precisely appropriate. "May," Ines said, turning to Teresa, "have you noticed anything unusual on the water?" She told her about the vibration, the subaudible pulse. She didn't look surprised. She looked confirmed. 3 other fishing crews from 3 different Azorean islands have reported the same thing independently to the University of the Azores Oceanography Department, she said. "The pulse is real. It's measurable. And it started 12 days ago, 9 days before NASA detected the signal. Whatever was down there had been calling for over a week before anyone with the right antenna happened to hear. On the 6th day, the Portuguese Navy established a formal maritime exclusion zone with a 20-kilometer radius centered on the coordinates." Teresa was not allowed to fish her water. She received the notification by VHF radio while rigging her lines at the harbor. And I watched something in her go quiet and cold. "They're telling me I can't fish," she said that evening, sitting in her chair by the window. Not angry, worse than angry. Displaced. "It's temporary. Nothing the military calls temporary has ever been temporary." She was not wrong about this historically, but I didn't say that. The exclusion zone was enforced by the frigate and 2 patrol boats, and within it, the research vessels had multiplied. I counted 11 from the clifftop above Faja Grande the next morning. 11 vessels, arranged in concentric patterns around a patch of ocean that, as far as anyone on the surface could see, looked exactly like every other patch of ocean around it. Gray-blue, breathing with swells, empty. But it was not empty. The hydrophone data Inez showed me that evening, leaked to a research group by a colleague at the University of the Azores, made that clear. The subaudible pulse was intensifying. Not louder, more complex. What had been a simple rhythmic beat was developing overtones, harmonics, subpatterns. The thing beneath the water was not repeating itself. It was elaborating. "It's like watching someone warm up an instrument," Inez said, staring at the spectrogram on her screen. The first signals were simple, single notes. Now it's playing phrases. "Playing for whom?" I asked. She looked at me. That's the question everyone is asking and nobody has an answer for. The original signal was embedded in Voyager's carrier frequency and pointed at the Madrid DSN dish. That's outward, toward deep space. But the subaudible pulse is radiating in all directions. That's local. Something down there is communicating on two channels simultaneously, one aimed at the stars and one aimed at everything nearby. What's nearby? We are Pi, the Azores, the mid-Atlantic ridge, 2,300 kilometers of submarine volcanic terrain, and us. I need to tell you about a decision I made, and I need you to understand that I made it not because I'm brave, but because I'm a 60-year-old man who spent 22 years studying the marine biology of the Azores. And I could not sit in my kitchen listening to the radio while something unprecedented was happening in my ocean. I called Dr. Amelia Sousa at the University of the Azores Department of Oceanography and Marine Biology. Amelia and I had co-authored 3 papers in the late 2000s on hydrothermal vent communities along the mid-Atlantic ridge. We hadn't spoken in 2 years. She answered on the first ring. "Marcos, I was going to call you. I want in." A pause. "In on what specifically?" "Whatever you're organizing. I know you. You're not sitting in Ponta Delgada reading press releases. You have a plan. You always have a plan." Another pause, longer. Then, "The EMEPC has authorized a manned submersible deployment to the coordinates. The French are providing the vehicle Nautilus, the same one from the Titanic surveys. The Portuguese government insisted on a joint scientific team. I'm leading the biology component. Take me. Marcos, you're retired. I'm retired from a desk. I'm not retired from knowing these waters. I've dived the Azorean seamounts more times than anyone on your current staff, and you know it. The depth is over 2,000 meters. Nautil is rated to 6,000. The longest pause yet. I could hear her thinking. Amelia is the kind of scientist who makes decisions like a chess player, not the next move, but the 3 after it. "I can get you on the support vessel as a consulting specialist," she said finally. "Not on the submersible. The dive crew is fixed. But you'd be on the ship, in the operations room, reviewing the live feed." "I'll take it." "You'll need to be in Ponta Delgada by tomorrow afternoon. The support vessel Mario Ruivo leaves the morning after." I hung up and stood in my kitchen and felt the particular terror of having gotten exactly what I asked for. Teresa was in the garden. I went outside and told her. She stopped pruning the hydrangeas and looked at me, not with the expression of a wife surprised by her husband's decision, with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for this exact conversation and already knew how it would go. "I'm coming too," she said. "Teresa, it's a scientific vessel. They won't take a fisherwoman." "Then I'll take my own boat and follow. There's an exclusion zone." She put down the shears. "Marcos, whatever is under that water has been under my keel for 40 years. I have more right to be there than any French submersible. I couldn't argue with this because it was true. Teresa sailed the Santa Ynez to Ponta Delgada overnight while I flew. We rendezvoused at the harbor at dawn on day 7, and I barely recognized the port. San Miguel's capital had become, in less than a week, an operational staging ground for what the international press was calling the Flores Signal Investigation. Military vessels from 4 NATO nations occupied the outer harbor. A tent city of press equipment had sprung up along the Avenida Infante Dom Henrique. Satellite uplink dishes pointed at the sky like mechanical flowers. The research vessel, Any Mario Ruivo, was berthed at the scientific dock. And Dr. Amelia Sousa met me on the gangway with the harried look of someone who had slept 3 hours in the last 48. "Your wife," she said, nodding toward the Santa Ynez, visible 2 berths down. "Is she actually planning to follow us in a 10-meter fishing boat?" "She is. The Navy won't let her inside the exclusion zone. She knows. She'll sit outside the boundary in the open Atlantic for the duration of the operation. Amelia, that woman once waited 14 hours for a tuna to tire. She will sit outside the boundary until the ocean freezes." She looked at me. Then she looked at Teresa's boat. Then she laughed, the short, sharp laugh of a woman who has decided to stop fighting a thing she can't change. "Fine, but she's not on my insurance." We sailed at 800. The Mario Ruivo was a proper oceanographic vessel, 68 meters. Full laboratory suite, a moon pool for deploying equipment through the hull, and a crew of 42 scientists and technicians who moved through the corridors with the focused quiet of people who understood they were sailing towards something none of their training had prepared them for. Teresa followed at a distance, the Santa Ynez looking absurdly small in the Mario Ruivo's wake. I stood on the aft deck and watched her boat rise and fall on the swells, and I felt something I had not felt in years. The specific combination of love and exasperation and fear that constitutes marriage when the stakes are real. The transit took 14 hours. We arrived at the exclusion zone boundary at 2200 and were cleared through by the Naval Patrol. Teresa was not cleared. I watched the Santa Ynez slow and stop, rocking gently in the darkness outside the perimeter. And I called her on the VHF. "I'm here," she said. "I see you. Can you feel it?" I closed my eyes. Through the steel deck of the Mario Ruivo, through my boots, up through my legs, and into my chest, the pulse. Stronger here, much stronger. Not painful, not uncomfortable, but present in a way that made the boundary between my body and the ocean feel thinner than it should be. "Yes," I said. "I feel it. It's been getting stronger since this afternoon. Marcos, the fish are gone." "What?" "All of them. Nothing on the sounder. I've never seen this water empty. Not once in 40 years. Whatever is down there, the fish have left." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Teresa said, "Be careful with whatever you find." "I will. I'll be here." She would be there. I knew this absolutely. Teresa would sit in her 10-meter boat on the dark Atlantic and wait. The Nautilus went down at 0630 on a morning so still the ocean looked like poured concrete. 3 people inside. The pilot, a French geophysicist named Dr. Alain Moreau, and Amelia. I was in the operations room with 6 other scientists, watching through the submersible's cameras on screens that made the deep ocean look like a television channel from another world. The descent took 2 hours. I've watched submersible footage many times in my career. And the first thing that struck me was how familiar the initial portion looked, the blue fading to indigo, the particles drifting upward like inverted snow, the gradual compression of the visible world into the cone of the vehicle's lights. At 800 meters, The pulse became audible on the submersible's exterior hydrophones. Not subaudible anymore. A sound. Low, rhythmic, textured with harmonics that made the speakers in the operations room vibrate in a way that felt almost vocal. Not a voice, but not a voice. At 1,200 meters, Amelia reported that the seafloor was visible on sonar and that it didn't match the existing charts. The bathymetry data for this area shows a relatively flat abyssal plain, she said, her voice compressed by the communication link. What I'm seeing on sonar is structured, geometric, ridged formations in a pattern that is too regular to be geological. Dr. Moreau confirmed. Repeating formations. Spacing is consistent. This is not natural topography. At 1,600 meters, the lights reach the bottom. I'm going to describe what the cameras showed, and I'm going to do it carefully, because I watched the footage 7 times in the hours afterward, and I want to be precise. The ocean floor was covered in structures, not ruins, not artifacts, structures that were growing. They rose from the basalt seabed in columns that curved inward toward each other, forming arches, and the arches connected to other arches, and those connected to others, creating a lattice that extended beyond the range of the submersible's lights in every direction. The material was dark, nearly black, but it caught the light with an iridescence that shifted from deep blue to violet as the angle changed. Each column was roughly the diameter of a mature tree trunk, and the surface texture was organic, ridged, layered, like the growth rings of something that had been building itself for a very long time. And they were vibrating. Each column pulsed with the rhythm we'd been feeling on the surface. The pulse wasn't coming from one source. It was coming from all of them, synchronized. A choir of resonance that I could feel through the ship's hull, even from 2,000 meters above. Amelia's voice was very steady. Operations. Are you recording this? Confirmed, Naudil. All feeds recording. I need to state for the record that what I'm observing is a constructed environment of unknown origin, composed of an unidentified material, exhibiting synchronized vibrational behavior at a frequency consistent with the sub-audible pulse detected on the surface. The structures are not consistent with any known geological formation, biological structure, or human construction. A pause, then quieter. Marcos, are you there? I'm here, Amelia. It's beautiful. It was. Even through the camera, even on a screen, even processed through compression and transmission and the cold distance of technology, it was beautiful in the way that large, incomprehensible things are beautiful. The way a hurricane is beautiful from orbit. The way the inside of a volcano is beautiful in the instant before you understand what you're looking at. The lattice went on and on. The Nautile moved through it for 40 minutes, and the structures never repeated exactly. But they never deviated from the underlying pattern. It was architecture. It was purpose. It was something that had been building itself beneath our ocean while we fished above it and ate bread and argued about the news on the radio. At 11:47, something changed. The Nautil was navigating a wide corridor between 2 rows of the arched structures when the pilot reported a sudden instrument anomaly. "Navigation is drifting," he said. "Compass unreliable. Gyroscope showing inconsistent readings." Then the pulse stopped. After 8 days of continuous rhythm felt on the surface, detected by instruments, recorded by hydrophones, it simply stopped. The silence that followed was so abrupt that several of us in the operations room flinched, as if a sound we'd unconsciously been leaning on had been pulled away like a chair. 3 seconds of silence. Then the structures changed color. All of them, simultaneously. The dark iridescence shifted from blue-violet to a deep, warm amber, that pulsed once not with the mechanical rhythm we'd been feeling, but slowly, like a breath, and held. "Noddle, please confirm visual status," the operations director said, leaning forward. "Confirmed. The structures have changed coloration. Ambient light levels have increased. I don't think the light is coming from our vehicle." The amber glow was emanating from the structures themselves. The lattice was lit from within, and the light moved through it the way blood moves through vessels, the way electricity moves through a grid, not all at once, but in a cascade, each column illuminating fractionally after its neighbor, the wave of light traveling through the lattice at a speed that was clearly governed, clearly controlled. And then the columns nearest to the Nautical began to move. Not violently, not quickly. They shifted orientation, the arches overhead opening wider, creating a larger space around the submersible. It took perhaps 30 seconds. When it was done, the Nautical was sitting in a chamber that had not existed 60 seconds ago, formed by the deliberate rearrangement of the structures around it. "It knows we're here," Amelia whispered. Nobody in the operations room spoke. On the screen, the amber light pulsed again, 1, 2, 3, in a pattern that, even without analysis, even without the computational linguistics tools Inez and her colleagues were applying onshore, was unmistakably a count. 1, 2, 3. Then it waited. I reached for the communications panel before I fully understood what I was doing. The operations director looked at me. I looked at him. "Let me talk to Amelia," I said. He handed me the microphone. "Amelia," it counted to 3. "I know. Count back." A pause so long I could hear the ocean in it. Then Amelia said to the pilot, "Exterior lights. Pulse them. 1, 2, 3, 4. The pilot hesitated for barely a second. Then the Nautil's exterior floodlights went dark and came back. Dark and back. Dark and back. Dark and back. 1, 2, 3, 4. The amber light in the lattice pulsed 5 times. The Nautil pulsed 6. The lattice pulsed 7. In the operations room, someone began to cry. Not from fear, from recognition. Something beneath the Atlantic, something older than any human structure on these islands, was counting with us. The Nautil surfaced at 1600 after 9.5 hours submerged. By then, the counting exchange had progressed beyond simple integers into something that Inez, participating by satellite link from our kitchen table in Flores, described as mathematical handshaking. "It's establishing shared reference," she said, her voice tight with an excitement I recognized from her childhood, the same voice she'd used at age 8 when she discovered the tidal pool behind the house contained a species of nudibranch not documented on Flores. Prime numbers first, then arithmetic operations, then geometric relationships. It's teaching us its notation system, or it's learning ours, or both simultaneously. By evening, the Nautil's recordings and the lattice's responses had been transmitted to analysis teams at JPL, CNES in Toulouse, ESA in Darmstadt, and Inez's research group in Coimbra. The preliminary consensus, reached with the caution of scientists who know they are about to say something that will change their careers irrevocably, was this. The lattice was communicating. Deliberately, intelligently, through a symbolic system that, while alien in structure, was designed or was adapting in real time to be comprehensible to human mathematics. And the coordinates it had broadcast through Voyager's carrier wave were not a distress signal or an announcement. They were an invitation. The lattice had sent its address because it wanted visitors. It wanted to be found. Teresa called me on the VHF at 2100. She was still out there, bobbing in the dark, the Santa Ynez riding the long swells beyond the exclusion perimeter. "The water's glowing," she said. I went to the deck. She was right. Beyond the naval vessels, beyond the research ships, the ocean to the west was faintly luminous. Not bioluminescence. I know what bioluminescence looks like. This was deeper, steadier, amber. The lattice's light was reaching the surface. Teresa, you should come in. I'm not leaving. It's the middle of the night. You've been out here for 2 days. The water's warm, Marcos. What? The surface temperature has risen 4 degrees since yesterday. The Barranco Frio isn't cold anymore. The upwelling has changed. Something down there is generating heat. I gripped the railing. Warm water. In the Azores, warm water means volcanic activity. It means the ridge is moving. It means the thing that built these islands out of fire is stirring in its sleep. But this wasn't volcanic. The water chemistry sensors on the Mario Ruivo showed no sulfide increase, no change in pH, no volcanic signature at all. The heat was coming from the lattice. It's waking up, I said, and I didn't mean it as a metaphor. Marcos. Yes? I can hear it now, not feel it, hear it. Through the hull. It sounds like I don't know. It sounds like a church. Like 100 people singing in a church, except there aren't words, just the sound. I listened. Through the deck, through my boots, I could feel it. And she was right. It had crossed some threshold. What had been subaudible was now almost audible. Almost a sound. Almost something you could lean into and follow. On the morning of the 9th day, the lattice transmitted. Not the slow mathematical handshake it had been building with the Nautil. Something else. At 0712 UTC, every hydrophone in the exclusion zone, every sonar array on every naval vessel, every acoustic sensor on the Mario Ruivo. And, as we would learn within the hour, every seismograph on every island in the Azores recorded a simultaneous burst of structured data from the ocean floor. The burst lasted 11 seconds. It was loud enough that Teresa, 20 kilometers from the source, heard it through the wooden hull of the Santa Ynez as a deep, resonant chord that made her fillings ache. Then silence. Then the pulse resumed, but different now. Slower, calmer. The rhythm of something that has said what it needed to say and is waiting for the response. I was in the operations room when the burst came through. The acoustic data rendered on screen as a dense cascade of waveforms that looked, to my untrained eye, like a solid wall of information. The signals team began processing immediately. Inez's group in Coimbra received the data simultaneously through their university's seismograph network. She called me at 0930. Pi, we've decoded the first layer. Tell me. The burst contained the same mathematical reference system it established during the counting exchange, but extended. Extended massively. It includes pi. I need you to understand that what I'm about to say is preliminary, and I may be wrong. Tell me, Inez. It includes what appears to be a structural description of itself. A blueprint, not just of the lattice at the coordinates, but of a connected system, nodes, hundreds of them, along the entire mid-Atlantic ridge from Iceland to the South Atlantic, all of them at similar depths, all of them connected through the ridge itself. I sat down. The lattice at our coordinates isn't an isolated structure, she said. It's one node in a network that spans the Atlantic. And the burst was the same data, transmitted simultaneously from our node through the ridge to all the others. It was a relay. Our node received confirmation of human contact, and it told the rest of the network. Told them what? That we answered, that we counted back. I looked at the other scientists in the operations room. Some of them were listening to their own calls, their own data feeds, reaching the same understanding at the same speed. I watched Dr. Moreau, the French geophysicist, lower his phone from his ear and stare at the wall with the expression of a man who has just been informed that the ground he's standing on is not ground. Inez, how old are these structures? Moreau's team did a preliminary radiometric estimate from a sample the Naudil collected. PI, it came back at 14,000 years, plus or minus 2,000. These structures predate every known human construction on Earth. They predate agriculture. They were here before we were here. 14,000 years. The lattice had been growing beneath the Atlantic for 14,000 years. Growing, pulsing, waiting. And 12 days ago, it had decided, or something had triggered it to decide to send its address to the stars through the nearest available transmitter, which happened to be NASA's deep space antenna in Madrid, piggybacking on a signal meant for a spacecraft launched in 1977. It had used our own voice to speak. There's one more thing, Inez said. The blueprint data includes projected growth patterns, future states. The lattice isn't finished, Pi. The network is still expanding. It's been expanding for 14,000 years, and it's not done. What is it building toward? A pause. Then, very quietly, completion. At 1400 on the 9th day, I made a decision that violated every protocol the scientific mission had established. And I made it because I am married to a stubborn woman who was right about her own ocean before any of us were right about anything. I asked the Mario Ruivo's captain to transmit the acoustic data from the morning burst, all of it, unprocessed on a frequency that a standard marine VHF radio could receive. He refused. The data was classified pending international review. I asked Dr. Amelia Sousa to intervene. She asked why. Because my wife has been sitting in a 10-meter fishing boat for 3 days, and she has felt this thing through her hull since before any of us knew it existed. She deserves to hear what it said. Amelia looked at me for a long time. Then she walked to the communications console and spoke to the captain in the tone she uses when she has decided that the bureaucracy is wrong and she is right, which is the same tone she used in 2009 when she told the Minister of the Sea that his fishing quotas would collapse the jack mackerel population within 4 years. She was right then, too. The captain transmitted a compressed summary of the decoded mathematical content on VHF channel 72. A working channel, not a distressed channel, technically not a violation of any specific regulation, but certainly a violation of the spirit of several. Teresa received it. She called me 10 minutes later. Her voice was different. Not frightened, not excited, stripped of something, reduced to the essential. Marcos, this thing is older than the islands. Yes. It's been under my boat my whole life. Yes. Under my father's boat, under my grandfather's boat. Yes, Teresa. Silence. The sound of water against a wooden hull, then. I dropped a hydrophone over the side. Just a fishing sounder, nothing fancy. But I can hear it, really hear it now. It's not just one sound, it's layers, dozens of layers. And underneath all of them, there's a note that, Marcos, it sounds like the island. Like the sound Flores would make if Flores could sing. That low volcanic hum you feel when you put your hand flat on the basalt cliffs at Rocha dos Bordos. It's that. It's exactly that. I closed my eyes. We've been living on top of it, she said. The island isn't separate from it. The basalt, the volcanic rock, it's the same material. Marcos, I think the island grew from this thing. I think the lattice built the ridge, and the ridge built the islands. And we built our houses on top of it without ever knowing what the foundation was. I did not tell her that Moreau's geological analysis, which I'd read an hour ago, suggested exactly this. that the lattice's material was compositionally identical to the basalt of the mid-Atlantic ridge. That it was not growing on the ridge, it was the ridge. The entire geological feature that splits the Atlantic Ocean in two was, at some fundamental level, this thing's body. I let her arrive at the truth herself. She had earned it. The final event of the 9th day is the one I've replayed more than any other, and it is the one that brought me here, to this recording, to the reason I'm telling you all of this. At 1930, as the sun was setting over the western Atlantic and turning the luminous water the color of heated copper, the lattice pulsed 3 times rapidly. Then it broadcast a new signal. Not through the ocean, through the air. Every radio on every vessel in the exclusion zone received it simultaneously. The frigate, the research ships, the Mario Ruivo, and the Santa Ynez. It was the coordinates again. The same coordinates NASA had read aloud 9 days earlier. But this time, there was more. A second set of numbers, appended to the first. Ynez decoded them in real time from Flores, her voice shaking on the satellite phone. They're coordinates too, Pi. But they're not on Earth. Where? They match the position of the Voyager 1 spacecraft. The exact position, corrected for current trajectory and velocity. It knows where Voyager is. It's been tracking it. The lattice had received our spacecraft's signal, decoded its position, sent that position back to us through our own deep space network, and was now transmitting both its own address and Voyager's address together. 2 points, a line, a connection between here and there. It's showing us a relationship, Ynez said. It's saying, you reach toward the stars. I am what you were reaching for. I have always been here. I have always been closer than you thought. The amber glow beneath the surface intensified, not dramatically, gently, the way a light comes up in a room when someone who has been sitting in the dark finally decides to let you see them. Teresa called me. Her voice was calm now. The terror had passed through her and come out the other side as something I can only describe as recognition. I'm going to drop anchor here tonight, she said. Sleep on the boat. The water's warm and the current's gentle and the sound is... Marcos, the sound is the most peaceful thing I've ever heard. Be careful. I will. Marcos? Yes? I think it was always here. I think my father knew. He used to say the ocean off Flores had a heartbeat. I thought it was poetry. He wasn't a poet. No, I said. She wasn't. I'm going to sleep over the singing. I'll call you at dawn. Teresa. Yes? I love you. I know. I love you too. Now stop worrying and go look at the data. You're a scientist. Go be a scientist. I'll be the fisherwoman. I stood on the deck of the Mario Ruivo and watched the lights of the Santa Ynez riding the warm, amber-lit swells. And I thought about the sound her father must have felt through the bottom of a wooden boat 60 years ago. The same sound, the same source, the same patience. What happened after the 9th day is public record. You have read it, or you have not. The details are available in the preliminary report of the International Flores Signal Investigation Committee in the open access data repository hosted by the University of the Azores. In the hundreds of news articles and analysis pieces and opinion columns that have been published in the weeks since, I will summarize what matters. The lattice's broadcast triggered a cascade response along the mid-Atlantic ridge. Within 72 hours of the 9th day transmission, identical acoustic signatures were detected at nodes corresponding to every major volcanic formation on the ridge. From Jan Mayen in the Norwegian Sea to Bouvet Island in the South Atlantic. 317 nodes in total, each one producing its own variation of the harmonic structure. each one contributing to what oceanographers are now calling the ridge chorus. The chorus is audible. If you are on a boat anywhere in the Atlantic Ocean, you can hear it, not loudly, not intrusively. But if you cut your engine and sit in the silence and listen, really listen, the way Teresa taught me to listen to the water, it's there. A low, complex, shifting harmonic that rises through the hull and into your body and sounds, as Teresa said, like a church full of singers performing a piece that has no beginning and no end. The lattice did not surface. The structures remain at depth. No further mathematical exchanges have occurred since the 9th day. The counting, the mathematical handshake, the structural blueprint, the coordinate transmission, all of it appears to have been a single, unified communication event. A statement, a declaration, an introduction that, having been delivered, does not need to be repeated. What it said, in the simplest translation Inez's research group has produced, amounts to this. I am here. I have been here longer than you. I am the foundation you built upon. I heard you calling into the dark, and I'm answering. I am not a threat. I am not a gift. I am a fact. I am the living geology of your world. I have been singing since before your species existed, and I'm glad, finally, that you can hear me. This is a translation. Inez would be the first to tell you it is imprecise, metaphorical, shaped by human assumptions about intent and emotion. The lattice may mean none of these things the way we mean them. But the mathematical content points in this direction, and the harmonic content, the chorus itself. The thing you feel in your chest when you stand on the cliffs of Flores and face west. The harmonic content feels true in a way that transcends translation. The world has not ended. The world has not been saved. Something that was always there has been revealed, and we are deciding what to do about it. I can tell you what I am doing about it. I went home, to Flores, to the house my grandfather built from basalt. The same basalt that, according to the geophysical analysis, is contiguous with the lattice material at the molecular level. My house is built from the body of the thing that spoke to the stars. I went back to my kitchen and I turned on the radio and I made coffee and I waited for Teresa. She came home on the morning of the 12th day, sunburned and salt-crusted and lighter than I had seen her in years. She set her kit bag on the table and sat down and drank the coffee I poured her without speaking. And then she told me what she had experienced during the 3 nights she'd slept on the water above the lattice. I could feel it thinking, she said. Not words, not pictures, something else. Like when you put your hand on the side of a horse, and you can feel its breathing and its heartbeat, and you just know that it's aware of you, that it's choosing to be still, that it could move if it wanted to. Were you afraid? The first night, the second night, less. The third night, I put my hand flat on the hull, and I closed my eyes, and I listened, and I felt like I was 14 again, diving off the cliffs with my father, hanging in the water, looking down into the blue. That feeling of being held by something enormous that doesn't mean you harm. Your father died in that water. She looked at me. My father died because he went too deep and got stuck. The water didn't kill him. The water held him afterward. The water gave him back. I did not know how to argue with this, and I did not try. Teresa has her understanding of the ocean, and I have mine. And they have coexisted for 31 years without needing to be the same. Inez wants to stay, I told her. She's applied to join the permanent monitoring team the university is establishing here. Here on Flores? Where else? The note is off our shore. She smiled. The first real smile I'd seen from her since the coordinates were broadcast. Our daughter, the scientist, coming home to study the thing under her mother's fishing ground. She gets it from me. She gets the stubbornness from me. She gets the stubbornness from both of us, and God help whoever she marries. We sat in the kitchen and drank coffee, and the radio played RDP Acor. Not news this time, just music, the morning program a musical, local artists and Portuguese standards, and the occasional fado that makes tourists cry and makes us nod, because we've known that sadness our whole lives. And it is not a sadness to be cured, but a sadness to be carried. Beneath us, beneath the basalt, beneath the island, the lattice sang. I want to tell you about the radio, because this is where you came in. And because what happened to the radio is perhaps the strangest part of all of this, or the most natural, depending on how you think about what the lattice is. On the morning of the 15th day, I was in the kitchen. Radio on, RDP Accords, as always. The presenter was reading a weather bulletin, anticyclone approaching from the west, moderate seas, visibility good, routine. Then, between the weather and the next segment, in the pause where there is usually a station identifier jingle, the radio produced a sound. Not static, not interference. A note. A single, sustained, harmonically rich note that was unmistakably the same tone I had felt through the deck of the Mario Ruivo, through the hull of the Santa Inés, through the basalt of my own garden wall. The lattice's voice, coming through the speaker of my kitchen radio. It lasted 4 seconds. Then the programming resumed as if nothing had happened. I stood very still. Then I turned the dial. Not to another station. To the space between stations, the empty frequencies, the white noise. And in the white noise, threading through it like a whispered conversation beneath the sound of rain, I could hear the chorus. Not loudly, not clearly, but there. I turned the dial further. Every frequency, every band. AM, FM, shortwave. The chorus was in all of them, faintly, below the broadcast signals, below the noise floor, a presence in the electromagnetic spectrum that had not been there before, as if the lattice, having introduced itself through NASA's deep space network, having made contact through the ocean, having sung through stone and water and hull, was now extending its voice into the air itself. I called Inez. She confirmed it. Electromagnetic emissions from the ridge chorus were being detected globally, across multiple frequency bands. Not jamming, not interfering, just present, underneath. A carrier wave with no station, broadcasting nothing but the fact of its own existence. You can hear it. If you're listening to this on a radio, you can hear it. Turn the volume up. Listen beneath my voice, beneath the static, beneath everything you think is silence. It's there. It was always there. I am sitting in my kitchen. The window is open, and the wind from the west carries salt and hydrangea and the sound of Teresa in the garden, arguing with the neighbor's cat. My coffee is getting cold. The radio's on. I don't know what the lattice is. Not really. Amelia calls it a geological consciousness. Moreau calls it a planetary nervous system. Inez calls it a communication infrastructure that predates its users. The press calls it 100 different things depending on the day and the outlet and how frightened the editor is. Teresa calls it the singing. I think Teresa is closest. Here is what I know. I know that the mid-Atlantic ridge, the spine of the ocean, the volcanic boundary that splits continents, is alive in a way that our science did not predict and cannot yet explain. I know that it has been alive for at least 14,000 years. I know that it used our own deep space network to introduce itself, choosing to speak to us in our own language, through our own instruments, at a moment of its own choosing. I know that it is not hostile. I know it is not a rescue. I know it is exactly what Inez said. A fact. Something that was always true about the world we live in, now made audible. I know that my wife sleeps better than she has in years, because the ocean she loves has a voice now, and the voice is kind. I know that my daughter is coming home. I know that the basalt beneath my feet is not dead rock. It is the outermost edge of something that stretches from Iceland to Antarctica, something that has been growing and singing and waiting with a patience that makes human history look like a single held breath. And I know that if you are listening to this, you are hearing two things: my voice, and beneath it, if you are quiet enough, if you are still enough, the sound of the planet discovering that it has always been able to speak. Listen, it isn't frightening. It sounds like home.